Catelyn Stark had seen enough death to know when something was about to go wrong. Years of war, betrayal, and loss had changed her. She wasn't the same Lady of Winterfell who once smiled warmly in the snow-covered halls of her home. Her eyes had grown sharper, her instincts louder, and on the night of the Red Wedding, her heart was screaming. They had arrived at the Twins, tired and hopeful. Robb, her son the King in the North, was still young, still brave, still dreaming of peace. He believed in honor. He believed that Lord Walder Frey, despite being insulted by Robb's broken promise of marriage, would forgive and accept the new alliance. After all, they brought Edmure as a groom. It seemed fair. But Catelyn wasn't so sure. She had warned Robb before. "You broke your word," she had said coldly when he married Talisa. "Walder Frey is not a man to forgive. He counts every insult like coin, and you've left him poor." But Robb had been in love, and love, she knew, could blind even the best kings. Still, Catelyn tried to trust, tried to believe that old Walder would not dare spill noble blood under guest rights, that even the filthiest lords of Westeros would fear the gods enough not to murder under their roofs. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. That night, as music filled the hall and laughter bounced off stone walls, Catelyn's hands stayed cold. She watched everything, the way Walder's sons whispered to each other, the way some guards left their posts quietly, and the way the band played a strange, off-beat tune. The Rains of Castamere, a Lannister song. Why would they play that here? She leaned closer to Robb and whispered, "Something is wrong." But Robb only smiled faintly, trying to enjoy the moment. Edmure looked drunk, but happy. The Frey girl he had married was plain but not cruel. It almost looked like peace. Almost. Then she noticed something that made her breath catch Roose Bolton's eyes. Cold, focused. His hand rested too calmly near the hilt of his dagger. He wasn't drunk, not even pretending to enjoy the wedding. Just watching, waiting. Catelyn rose from her seat slowly, pretending to stretch her arms. But really she was trying to listen. Something outside. No birds, no wind, just quiet. Too quiet for a feast. She moved behind Roose and laid a gentle hand on his arm, as if in greeting. But it was a test. She felt the armor under his sleeves. "Why wear armor to a wedding?" she asked softly. He looked at her with a half-smile and said nothing. That was the moment she knew. Everything after that happened too fast. The doors slammed. The music grew louder, sharper. Arrows rained down. Knives flashed. Blood splashed on dresses and tablecloths. Talisa fell first, screaming with eyes wide open as her unborn child was cut from her belly. Robb shouted, but the sound was drowned by screams. But what if it didn't have to happen? What if Catelyn had trusted her instincts earlier? What if, when she saw the signs, the odd music, the whispers, the missing guards, she had stood up and said something loudly? What if she had warned Robb not to attend the wedding at all? What if she had convinced him to send Edmure alone, or meet Walder outside the Twins instead? She had power, she had the wisdom, but she also had doubt. She had wanted to believe in honor, in guest rights, in peace. She had wanted to believe in something good for once. But in Westeros, believing in good often meant death. And as she knelt in the blood-soaked hall, her own throat torn open, her last thought was not about vengeance or rage. It was about failure, about the warning signs she saw but ignored. Because maybe, just maybe, if Catelyn Stark had acted sooner, the Red Wedding might never have happened. The Red Wedding didn't happen overnight. It was built, brick, by decisions made and ignored. Catelyn Stark had been walking through warning signs for weeks, maybe months, and now, as the blood dried on cold stone and the cries faded into silence, the truth screamed inside her even louder. But let's go back to when it could have all changed. It was during the march to the Twins. Robb was leading his army through the Riverlands, with fewer men than before. Many bannermen had left after the Karstarks were executed. That was another wound in the heart of the North. Catelyn had begged Robb not to do it. "He's a lord," she had said. "Kinslayer or not, killing Lord Karstark will make enemies, not peace." But Robb was too proud, too desperate to show strength, and every time he made a strong decision, it left them weaker. Catelyn sat alone in her tent that night, staring at the fire. Talisa had come to see her, offering warm smiles and gentle hands. She meant well, but Catelyn never fully trusted her. Not because she was foreign, but because she was unknown. "She's beautiful," Catelyn had said to Robb once, carefully choosing her words. "But you broke a kingdom for her." Robb had gotten angry. "I followed my heart. Is that a crime?" And maybe that was the problem. Catelyn knew that in war, love was a luxury, one you couldn't afford. And yet, she stayed silent after that. She stopped pushing. She stopped warning, because part of her thought, maybe I'm just being too harsh. But she wasn't. One night, just 2 days before the wedding, Catelyn had a visitor. A raven had arrived with a small message sealed in red wax. It was from one of her old spies, a servant who once worked at the Twins and owed her a favor. The message said only 3 words: "Don't trust Walder." She stared at it for a long time. The ink had smudged, like it was written in a rush. Maybe the servant had risked their life just to send that. And yet, she said nothing to Robb. Why? Maybe because she thought it was already too late. Maybe because part of her hoped just once that things would go right. But signs were everywhere. When they reached the Twins, Lord Walder greeted them with false smiles and crooked words. His eyes didn't blink much. His jokes were sharp, his laughter even sharper. He mocked Robb's wife in front of everyone, insulted their honor, but still smiled wide like nothing was wrong. Catelyn noticed that Frey guards stayed armed at the feast. She noticed that none of them danced, that they watched more than they drank. And then there was Roose Bolton. Roose, always calm, always quiet, had become closer to the Freys than to the Starks in those final days. He gave strange smiles, he whispered in corners, and he had refused wine at the wedding. Not because he didn't drink, but because he didn't want to lose focus. Catelyn had a chance. She could have asked Robb to leave, could have faked an illness, could have claimed a bad omen and demanded they stay in camp. She could have even gone to Lord Walder herself and warned him, woman to man, that if anything happened to her son, the North would rise in fire. But she didn't. She hesitated, because deep down she still believed in rules, in honor, in the old ways. That guest rights meant something. That bread and salt protected them. But Walder Frey didn't care for gods. He cared for pride and revenge. So now, in the silence that followed the massacre, the gods had gone quiet too. Catelyn's body lay on the floor. Still, eyes open but empty. Her mouth slightly parted as if trying to speak one last time, but no sound had come. Just blood. And outside the Twins, far from the horror, the North had no idea their king was dead, that his mother lay cold, that a betrayal so deep had just shattered everything. But before we say it's over, before we accept the Red Wedding as fate, let's rewind one last time, because somewhere between the warning note, the whispered words, and the suspicious armor, there was still a moment, one brief, shining moment, where Catelyn could have changed it all. And what if she had? What if she had taken that moment and lit the fire before the Freys could? What if she had acted like a Stark, not just a mother? Because in another world, a darker, sharper one, Catelyn Stark stood before Walder Frey and said no. In another thread of time, the gods gave her a second to act. It was a quiet second, the kind no one notices. No thunder, no wind, no voice from the sky. Just a shift, a flicker of instinct. That second came when Catelyn laid her hand on Roose Bolton's arm and felt the cold metal beneath his sleeve. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. Her heart just dropped like a stone in her chest, and instead of sitting back down, she turned to Robb. "Leave," she whispered. Not loud, not frantic, just firm. A mother's voice. "Get up. Take your wife. We leave now." Robb looked confused. "Mother, what now?" And something in her eyes told him this wasn't one of her warnings he could ignore. Something in her voice made him push back his chair, take Talisa's hand, and nod. But before he could take 2 steps, Lord Walder stood up. "Leaving so soon, Your Grace?" His old voice echoed through the hall, sly and full of mockery. Robb turned to him, polite as ever but tense. "We're tired, my lord." Walder smiled, lips thin and dry. "But the bedding ceremony is about to begin." It was a trap. Catelyn saw it now, clearer than ever. That damned ceremony, it was their excuse to close the doors, to bring in the killers, to take them all. She had 2 choices, run or fight, and Catelyn Stark chose to fight. In one motion, she grabbed the dinner knife from the table and lunged toward Walder's wife, dragging her close with the blade pressed against her throat. The room froze. "Call them off," she hissed at Walder, her voice shaking. "Call your men off, or she dies." Now every eye was on her. The music stopped, the fake smiles faded, and the Frey guards stiffened, stood stunned, half pulled back, Talisa clinging to his arm. Edmure looked around, wide-eyed, as if he had just woken from a dream. Walder blinked slowly. "You wouldn't." Catelyn didn't answer. She pressed the blade harder. The young girl whimpered in pain. A drop of blood rolled down her neck. Walder didn't love his wife. He had too many. But he didn't like being challenged. Not by a Stark. Not by a woman. Still, he raised one bony hand and waved it in the air. "Hold," he said, voice cold. The guards stopped. The doors remained open. The band looked around, unsure whether to keep playing. Even Roose Bolton didn't move. The hall held its breath. "Now," Catelyn said, never taking her eyes off Walder. "My son and his wife are leaving. We go. We leave. You let us." Walder looked at her for a long moment. "And what? You'll just ride off? After the insult? After the broken vow? Better insult than war," she spat. Walder chuckled. "You already brought war to my gates. And we'll bring more," she snapped. "You touch one hair on Robb's head, and the North will burn this place to the ground. You think Tywin Lannister will protect you from the wrath of Winterfell? From the Vale? From Riverrun?" Silence. His fingers twitched. His pride was aching. But even Walder Frey wasn't foolish enough to die for it. He gave a slow nod. "Let them go." Catelyn didn't move for a second. Then she gently pushed the girl toward him and lowered the knife. "Move," she told Robb. And this time, he obeyed. The walk out of the hall was slow. Every second, they expected arrows in their backs, but none came. Not yet. Outside, the night was colder than usual. They didn't speak. They mounted their horses. And when the gates finally closed behind them, Catelyn let out a long, shaking breath. They had escaped. But at what cost? They'd shamed Walder Frey in his own hall. They'd threatened his pride. And they knew, all of them knew, that this wasn't over. "You saved us," Talisa whispered, her voice barely above the wind. Catelyn didn't reply. Her hands were still shaking. Not from fear, from rage, from the weight of what almost happened. "We ride," she said. "Now, before he changes his mind." And as their horses galloped into the dark, muddy fields, the storm behind them hadn't broken yet. But it would, because Catelyn Stark hadn't prevented the Red Wedding. She had delayed it. And the game wasn't over. The air outside the twins felt thick, like the night itself was watching them. Robb, Talisa, Catelyn, and a handful of loyal men rode hard until they reached the edge of their camp, where the Northmen had made fires and were laughing, drinking, unaware that death had nearly touched their king just an hour ago. As soon as Robb dismounted, he turned to his mother. "You held a knife to his wife's throat," he said, voice low but sharp. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Catelyn stared at him. "I saved your life." "Yes, but now we've started a war inside a war." Catelyn stepped forward, voice steady. "You think we weren't already in one? Walder Frey was going to kill you, Robb." I saw it in his eyes. Roose Bolton wore armor. Guards were missing. The music changed. "You call that a wedding?" He looked away, angry, ashamed, silent. Talisa stepped between them, placing a hand gently on his arm. "She's right. I felt it too. Something was wrong in there." Robb didn't reply. He just walked off, into the tent, leaving Catelyn standing in the cold. But it wasn't over. An hour later, one of Robb's scouts returned with news that made Catelyn's blood run cold. "The Freys are rallying troops behind the walls. Quietly. Like they don't want us to know," the man said. "Looks like they're preparing for something." "And Bolton?" Catelyn asked quickly. "Gone," the scout replied. "Left the twins just after you did. Slipped away into the night." Her stomach twisted. Roose had left, without a word. No goodbye, no explanation, no loyalty. That could only mean one thing: he was part of it, part of the betrayal. And now he was likely riding straight to Tywin Lannister. "Walder let us walk out because he wasn't ready yet," Catelyn said slowly. "But he will be. And when he is, he'll strike harder, dirtier." Robb called a war council at once. The northern lords gathered inside the largest tent, candles flickering, maps stretched across the table. The faces around it were tired, suspicious, uncertain. They'd lost too many men already. They couldn't afford another enemy, especially not one inside their own walls. "He'll attack," Lord Greatjanumber said. "If we wait here, we die. We strike first. Burn the twins to the ground." "No," said Robb. "If we do that, we'll be the ones who broke guest rights. Not him. We'll lose the Riverlands. We'll lose the Vale. No one will stand behind a king who spills blood under a wedding roof." "He was going to do it first," someone shouted. "Intention doesn't win you allies," Robb snapped. "Only action matters." Catelyn watched her son, young, tired, trying to carry a crown that was crushing him, and she felt something heavier than fear settle in her chest. Guilt, because she'd saved his life. Yes, but she'd also just painted a target on his back larger than ever before. Walder Frey would not forget the humiliation. Roose Bolton would not forget the interference. And Tywin Lannister? He would be smiling, sharpening his knives, waiting for the North to collapse in on itself. The council ended without agreement. Some wanted to retreat, others wanted to attack. Robb didn't sleep that night. None of them did. By dawn, a raven arrived. No words, just a box. Inside it, the hand of one of their scouts' fingers chopped off. On the stump, a symbol burned into the flesh. The twins. A message. Catelyn held the box in silence. She didn't flinch. Just looked at it, then closed the lid. "They're already at war," she said. Robb nodded. "Then we fight." But in her heart, Catelyn knew. This war wasn't just with swords. It was with whispers, with old promises, with hidden knives. Enemies were everywhere, and worse, they were wearing the faces of friends. And now that she had stopped the Red Wedding, they would come for them another way. A darker way. Because some men didn't want you dead on a battlefield. They wanted you broken first. The northern camp was restless. Men sharpened blades they might not live long enough to swing. The wind howled through the riverlands like it was carrying the screams of ghosts, perhaps the very ones who should have died inside the twins but didn't. There was no sleep, only the waiting. Robb stood over the war table, fingers tracing a road on the map, eyes unfocused. "Half our scouts have gone silent," he muttered. "No birds, no riders, just silence." Catelyn stood across from him. "You don't lose that many men to coincidence, or to fray swords alone." They looked at each other. One name lingered in the air between them, neither wanting to say it, but both knowing. Bolton. Roose had vanished into the mist, and with him, their last thread of unity in the north. His men had left too, slipping away into the trees like ghosts. The traitor didn't need to swing a sword. His absence said everything. Catelyn clenched her fists. "We made a mistake, sparing Walder Frey." Robb didn't look up. "You mean I made the mistake?" She stayed quiet. He already knew. Their camp was no longer loyal. Whispers had started quiet, poisonous things. "She's cursed," some of the soldiers said, glancing at Catelyn when they thought she wasn't listening. "Where she walks, death follows. They say she threatened the old man's wife. Do you know what that means? She broke guest rights, not him." Robb had heard it too. It was spreading like fire through dry grass. Loyalty was thinning. One night, 2 of the guards at the outer post went missing. Found later with their throats slit, their armor gone. No witnesses, just blue. That was the night Catelyn went to see Talisa. The younger woman was tending to wounded men in the healer's tent, hands red to the wrists, face pale and tired. Catelyn watched her from the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "You're brave," she said softly. "You always were." Talisa looked up, surprised. "That's not something you say to someone you never trusted." Catelyn didn't smile. "You're right. I never did. I thought you were a distraction, a weakness, but now I see you were the one reason he didn't fall apart." Talisa stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Do you regret it?" Catelyn didn't answer right away. "I regret not cutting Walder Frey's throat when I had the chance. I regret thinking mercy had a place in war, and I regret waiting for men to do what I should have done myself." Talisa's eyes softened. "And Robb?" Catelyn looked away. "He's doing what he can. But the boy who wanted peace is gone. All that's left now is a king surrounded by knives." That night, a messenger arrived, not by raven, but in person. A young girl, shaking, hands trembling, clutching a note sealed in grey wax. She had ridden alone through the dark. "It's from the Dreadfort," she said, unable to look anyone in the eye. Robb broke the seal. "The North remembers weakness. We remember broken oaths. You are not our king." No signature. But they didn't need one. Roose Bolton had taken the North while they were too busy trying to save it. "He's turning them against me," Robb whispered. "One by one." Catelyn felt the walls closing in. "Then you need to remind them who the Starks are." He looked up. "And what is that, Mother?" Her voice turned cold. "The blood that built Winterfell, the wolves that bite when cornered. You must become the thing they fear, or you will become the thing they forget." Robb stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood tall. "Then we ride," he said. "Not back to Winterfell, not yet. First, we bring the twins to the ground. We make an example so loud the North hears it in their bones." Catelyn nodded. The Red Wedding hadn't happened. But the revenge it was meant to trigger, that storm was still coming. And this time, it wore a wolf's face. They rode at dawn, not for glory, but for vengeance. The banners of House Stark flew high, grey direwolves snapping in the wind like spirits waking from their slumber. Every hoofbeat across the cold riverlands echoed with one purpose: retribution. Robb Stark, once the boy king who believed in peace, now wore armor like it was part of his skin. His eyes had hardened, the lines of his face were sharper. He no longer asked for counsel, he gave commands. and his men, weary from loss but hungry for justice, followed. Catelyn rode behind him, her own face unreadable. She had once tried to guide him with mercy, but mercy had cost them too much. Her heart had cracked under the weight of everything she had lost, her husband, her daughters, her home, and now she was done begging the world to be fair. The Freys would pay. It was not a siege, it was a message. They reached the outer edge of the twins before sunset, their numbers small but precise. Only the loyal remained. Catelyn saw the gates ahead, the towers that had almost become their tombs. This time, they weren't asking for entry. Robb turned to Lord Umber, eyes sharp. Set the barrels. Keep it clean. No warnings. The Greatjon gave a grim nod and barked out the orders. Men moved quickly, hauling barrels packed with wildfire, stolen, bought, and scavenged. They knew the risks. One spark could kill them all. But that was the point. Catelyn approached Robb as he stood watching the Frey banners flap above the towers. "You're sure?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "He would have murdered us. He tried to, if we hadn't left that hall." Catelyn nodded slowly. "Then let him learn what it means to threaten wolves." At dusk, the drums began. The Freys watched from the walls, confused at first. No war horns, no siege towers, just a rhythm deep, steady, relentless. It wasn't a call to battle. It was a funeral march, their own. The wildfire ignited just as the sun kissed the horizon. Green flames surged up the side of the first tower with a hiss that turned into a scream. The wall exploded in a bloom of fire and shrapnel. Men on the ramparts were thrown into the air like broken dolls. And then the wolves charged. No mercy, no prisoners. Arrows rained, blades flashed. The gates, weakened by the blast, buckled under the first ram. The Northmen swarmed in, howling like animals released from cages. Catelyn watched from the hilltop, her heart silent. The twins, once a symbol of power, pride, and deception, burned from within. Lord Walder Frey had survived the first blast. He had stumbled from his tower in a fury, yelling curses, demanding vengeance. Robb found him in the Great Hall, the same hall where he had nearly been slaughtered. Now filled with smoke, ash, and the corpses of Frey guards, Walder stood at the far end, his eyes bulging, his skin pale with terror, still proud enough to sneer. "You dare," he spat. Robb didn't speak. He stepped forward. "No trial?" Walder mocked. "No justice? So this is what the Starks are now? Murderers like the rest?" Catelyn stepped in behind Robb then, her voice like ice. "You threw away justice when you sharpened your knives under guest rights," Walder snarled. "I should have slit your throat when I had the chance." Robb raised his sword, and with a single swing, silenced him. No grand speech, no hesitation, just steel and silence. When it was done, the fire still crackled behind them. The banners of House Frey fell from the walls, singed and blackened. Robb turned to the men gathered in the courtyard. "This is what happens," he shouted, "to those who betray the North." A cheer rose, but it was a cheer born from pain, not victory. Catelyn looked at her son, and for the first time, she wasn't sure what she saw. He had won, but at what cost? The Freys were gone, but something else had burned that night too. The last piece of the boy who believed in peace. And in his place stood a king who knew sometimes, to keep your crown, you had to become the thing you feared. The flames of the twins still lit the night like a beacon or a warning. Smoke rose high into the sky, twisting like a serpent, visible for miles. Every raven in the region scattered. Every spy of the Lannisters, Boltons, and beyond watched from the shadows and scribbled in haste. Catelyn stood outside the charred remains of the Frey Hall, breathing in the bitter smoke. It didn't smell like victory. It smelled like the end of something, like Winterfell had gone too far south and come back with its soul burned out. Robb had done what no Stark before him had dared. He had erased a house. Not just defeated, erased. Word spread quickly. The king in the north had slaughtered Walder Frey, burned the twins to ash, and claimed vengeance in blood. Some lords called it justice. Others called it madness. The line between the two was now so thin it may as well not exist. By the second night, new ravens arrived. One bore the seal of House Bolton. It was short, cruel, and written in the same red ink as the blood they spilled at the twins. "You've shown us fire. Now see what ice brings." There was no name on the scroll, just a flayed man drawn in the center. Catelyn's fingers gripped the parchment tightly. "Roose," she whispered. "He's finally shown his hand." Robb was already preparing for it. "We march north," he told his bannermen. "Now." But the road home was long, and Roose Bolton had already begun poisoning the path ahead. Reports came in like knives, each one deeper than the last. Winterfell had fallen again, not to the Ironborn this time, but to betrayal. Roose had taken the castle with minimal force. The gates were opened from within. Rumors whispered of gold, of bribes, of treachery bought with silver tongues and colder promises. The maester had been executed. The remaining Stark loyalists hanged from the walls. And worse, he had declared himself Warden of the North. Not in secret, not with hesitation. Publicly, boldly, with Lannister backing. "He's wearing our name like a stolen cloak," Catelyn said, her voice low. "And too many are ready to kneel just because it keeps them warm." Robb was silent. He had seen war. He had won battles. But this wasn't just war anymore. This was chess. And Roose Bolton wasn't playing for honor. He was playing for everything. Talisa approached Robb late that night, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. "You should think of your child," she said quietly. "Not just your crown." Robb looked at her, the only softness left in his world, and for a moment, something in him faltered. "I'm trying," he said. "But how can I protect him if I let Bolton rule our home?" Catelyn watched them from a distance. She heard the words. She felt the fear in them. And she remembered when she, too, had held a child in her arms, hoping the world would be kinder to them. It hadn't been. They rode at first light. Not as conquerors, but as exiles, returning to a home now claimed by strangers. On the way, more news came. Dark, cruel, almost unbelievable. In the Dreadfoot Roose's cursed keep, the bastard of Bolton had been legitimized. Ramsay Snow, now Ramsay Bolton, had begun ruling with fire and flaying. Villages were burned for disobedience. Families were torn apart. Skinned bodies were nailed to trees. The North was being bled, not by enemies, but by itself. "They're afraid," Catelyn said. "So they kneel." Robb's jaw clenched. "Then we remind them who the North belongs to." But even he knew they were walking into a trap. Roose wouldn't meet them in open battle. He would bleed them on the road, starve them with broken supply lines, and turn their own bannermen against them one by one. By the time they reached the edge of the neck, their numbers had already thinned. 2 small houses had declared for Bolton. One had blocked the road and refused them passage. Another had sent no response at all. Even the ravens were going silent. Catelyn rolled the beside her son in silence. "This war," she finally said, "it's not about who sits on a throne anymore." Robb looked at her. "It's about who's willing to lose their soul to keep it." He nodded once, then turned his eyes north, toward Winterfell, toward Roose, toward the final battle. But neither of them knew. The worst hadn't arrived yet. The walls of Winterfell rose in the distance like ghosts from a dream. But they weren't comforting anymore. They were cold, grey tombstones, watching silently as the last of the true Starks came crawling home. Snow fell gently as Robb's army arrived at the outskirts of their ancestral land. What was once their strength, their symbol of hope, was now poisoned. The Bolton banners flew high over the towers, crimson-flayed men fluttering in the wind where direwolves once howled. Catelyn stared at them, heart hollow. "It's like looking at a grave," she whispered. Robb said nothing. His eyes never left the walls. They had made it this far through betrayal, through fire, only to face death in the place they once called safe. The outer villages were deserted, doors hung open, hearths were cold. A mother and child had been found flayed and nailed to a tree outside the broken godswood. "A message," said one of the soldiers. "No," Catelyn replied coldly. "It's a sickness." And at the heart of it stood Ramsay Bolton, no longer a bastard in name, but still a monster in soul. They didn't charge the walls. Robb knew better now. He'd seen too many lives wasted on pride. Instead, they waited, built camps outside the gate, lit their fires, and dared the Boltons to come to them. Inside Winterfell, Roose watched from the ramparts, his face unreadable as always. Ramsay stood beside him, grinning like a wolf who had tasted blood and wanted more. "They'll come," Roose said simply. "They have no choice." But Ramsay licked his lips. "Let me take a few hounds. I'll bring you their heads before dawn." Roose's eyes narrowed. "We do not fight like dogs. Not yet. But we are dogs," Ramsay smiled. "They just don't know it yet." On the fifth night, a raven arrived. It carried no words, just a strip of skin wrapped in cloth. Robb's expression didn't change as he held it, but his knuckles turned white. "Enough," he said. Catelyn approached him quietly. "You'll attack?" He nodded. "Before they strike us from inside. Every hour we wait, another bannerman falls away, another house remembers. The flayed man pays better than the wolf." She looked at him carefully. "You know Roose will not fight fair. I'm not asking him to." And so the final assault began, not with horns, but with silence. Robb led a detachment through the Wolfswood under cover of night, while the rest of the army created a distraction on the main gate. The plan was simple. Get inside. Strike at Roose. Cut off the head. But Winterfell wasn't the same castle they remembered. Ramsay had turned it into a labyrinth of traps, hidden spikes, burning oil ready to pour from windows. They weren't just defending Winterfell. They were daring the Starks to try and take it back. Robb made it inside with 20 men. Only 8 reached the Great Hall. And then the trap closed. Ramsay was waiting, with his hounds, with fire, with madness in his eyes. Catelyn, watching from a distance with the main force, felt it before she saw it, a silence too heavy, a delay too long. And then the screams began. The gates were flung open. Men ran out on fire, bleeding, broken. Ramsay rode behind them on horseback, laughing, hurling torses, loosing dogs onto the retreating troops. The ambush had worked, but not for them. Catelyn grabbed a sword from a fallen soldier and turned to her guards. "Get me inside," she ordered. They tried to stop her. She didn't care. She ran through the snow, through the blood, and into the ruined gates of her home. And there, at the center of it all, she saw him. Robb, on his knees, bleeding, surrounded. Ramsay stood in front of him, one hand stroking a hound's neck, the other gripping a knife slick with red. "Well," he grinned, "so much for kings." Catelyn screamed and ran forward, blade raised, but the guards grabbed her before she could reach him. Ramsay knelt beside Robb, whispered something no one could hear, then plunged the knife deep, and Catelyn broke. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just broke. Later, they threw her into the crypts beneath Winterfell, not out of mercy, but mockery. "Let the dead rest with the dead," they said. But in the darkness, something stirred. Something old, something cold, something that had watched everything. And as snow covered the fields and the wolves lay silent, the north whispered its last breath. You should have killed them all.